Time for the light to shine. Hey, good morning, everybody. We are glad you're here. And I'm telling you what, you sound a little bit tired. I don't know why. Did anybody not change our clocks back? No, you all changed your clocks back, right? Sandy wasn't here this morning, and I thought, oh, man, she overslept. The last thing I told her before I left this morning, hey, listen, be sure you don't oversleep. So she gets here late this morning. She goes, guess what? I go, what, honey? She goes, I overslept. Oh, yeah. I would have loved to have overslept. Anyway, make sure that you check out your program. We got a lot of stuff going on here in the church that you need to know about. We've got our annual dessert auction that's coming up next week. We always have a ton of fun in the annual dessert auction. And also with the annual dessert auction, we raise a lot of money, thousands of dollars, for our youth missions, our student missions. They go on mission trips every single summer, and we raise the money this next Sunday for that to happen this summer. So if you can come and bring a dessert to be auctioned off, or if you can come and buy a dessert, or if you can just come and enjoy yourself, we're having dinner with us as well. Please be sure to do that. We'd love to have you there. The announcement is right there in the program. Also, Easter candy donations. That's one of the outreaches that we're doing this year with our children's ministry, and they have a bunch of these little plastic eggs, you know what I'm talking about? They're going to be putting candy inside those eggs. We don't have near enough candy. And so this week, if you can bring some candy, next Sunday, if you can bring some candy, there are donation boxes out in the lobby on the tables right before you come into the worship center. We would really, really appreciate that. And then also, I just want to say welcome to everybody who's here. Especially if you're a guest today, we're glad that you're here. And if you are a guest today, make sure that you stop by our welcome center. We've got a gift for you today, and we just appreciate you being here. I'd like to ask all of you, if you would, just to make sure you fill out this card, this connection card, and ask your name and all that kind of stuff. We like to check our records on our computers, just our database, just to make sure that we have everyone's information in there correctly. So welcome. We're glad that you're here today. And today what we're going to be talking about, a guy from the Old Testament. A guy from the Old Testament whose name that I think you'll all recognize. His name is Daniel. You recognize the name of Daniel, right? Now, Daniel has a book in the Bible named after him there in the Old Testament. Last week, we looked at a guy whose name was Nehemiah. Nehemiah has a book in the Old Testament named after him as well. And I think a lot of times when you hear the name Daniel, you automatically think of Daniel and the lion's den. Now, that actually happened, but it actually happened later in Daniel's life. And what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be starting at the beginning of Daniel's life, in the beginning of the book of Daniel, chapter 1. And Daniel, at this point in chapter 1, is about, he's a teenager. In his teens, and the culture in which Daniel lived, I think, really mirrors our culture today. Let me ask you a question as we kind of begin today. The question is this: do you get a sense that our culture is drifting further and further away from God or closer to God? Do you sense that our culture is drifting further and further from God or closer to God? Let me know. Yeah. I think probably most of you, if not all of you, would say, you know what? Our culture today is drifting further and further away from God. I mean, just look and see how polarized our culture is today. I mean, you've got those people over here and you got those people over here, and we are not going to meet in the middle in any way, shape, or form. Look at the unbelievable things that are said on social media today. Things are said on social media today that never would have been said to anyone's face 10 years ago. Or think about this, the mass shootings. The mass shootings that are going on all over the nation. And I think a lot of people today have just kind of grown numb to the mass shootings that are going on. And I think we could all agree that our culture has really shifted when it comes to morality. You see, that's why our children's ministry and our student ministry have kind of teamed up together over the past 3 weeks. They're finishing a series tonight called Made. This series called Made is actually focusing on sexual integrity, the sexual integrity of not only teenagers, but the sexual integrity of even children today. And I think a lot of times we would probably say our culture is just out of control. Our culture is spiritually out of control. Some people, I think, would even go on to say, you know what, our culture today is really spiritually dead. And I would almost tend to say, you know what, our culture is getting there. Our culture is getting to the point where we are going to be spiritually dead. And the tendency for us is to say, you know what, if our culture is going spiritually dead, then there's just no hope. No hope at all. But here's the deal. I think our church is filled with people who are dark horses. Now, remember what a dark horse is from last week? A dark horse is a person who is a common, everyday kind of person who will make a big impact for the Lord in the culture in which they live. And so I think a lot of our people in our church are dark horses. But what we need to do today in our culture is to ask the right questions. And here's the question I think we need to ask today. How do you stand out and stand strong in a culture of compromise? How do you stand out and how do you stand strong in a culture of compromise? Now listen. This is not the first culture shift that we've ever gone through as a nation. I mean, I think our nation, the United States of America, has been going through culture shift after culture shift after culture shift for years and years and years. And I think Daniel himself found himself in a culture shift. In fact, I think his culture had probably shifted more than ours. Now, the background of the story of Daniel actually begins in 605 BC. That's right, 605 BC, 600 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. And it begins with a guy whose name is Nebuchadnezzar. This guy by the name of Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon, the king of the Babylonian Empire, which would be modern-day Iraq. And he goes to Jerusalem. He destroys and he conquers Jerusalem. In fact, this guy was so evil that he just didn't destroy the city, but he destroyed the temple in the city. The Jewish temple in the city, he destroyed. He took their religious symbols and everything there in the temple, and he burned them and he crushed them as if to say, I will destroy anything and everything that you have that reminds you of your God. At this point, Daniel, like I said, is a teenager. I mean, maybe he's just finishing Jerusalem Community High School. I don't know. Maybe he's just a freshman in high school. I don't know. But Daniel is taken captive along with a lot of other people. And he's transported, he's deported 1,000 miles from Jerusalem to Babylon. And he's transported, he's deported to that city, to that empire. And that empire is really a perverted culture. The people live far, far from God. And that's where we pick up his story in Daniel chapter 1. If you happen to have a Bible with you today, open them up to Daniel chapter 1. If you don't know where the book of Daniel is, no big deal. Just look at the very front of the Bible to your table of contents, and there you'll find in the Old Testament the book of Daniel. Maybe you don't have a Bible with you today, just click on a Bible app. Look for the book of Daniel, and let's begin reading in verses 3 through 5. Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and the other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. And this is what he said. He said, select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning and are gifted with knowledge and good judgment and are suited to serve in the royal palace. And check this out. Train the young men, he said. He said, train these young men in the language. You see, what he wants to do here is to change the way they talk. And not only that, but train them in the literature of Babylon. Train them in the literature of Babylon. He wants to change how they think. And then it goes on in the next verse to say this. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. Not only does he want to change the way they think, the way they talk, but he wants to change how they live their lives as well. You see, they were to be trained for 3 years, it says, and then they would enter the royal service. Now, this is Nebuchadnezzar's strategic plan to indoctrinate the Hebrew young men into the Babylonian culture. And quite honestly, I really believe that Satan is at work today to indoctrinate you, to indoctrinate me. I believe Satan is working as hard as he can to change how we think, to change what we believe, to get us to believe like he believes, to get us to think just exactly like he thinks. And the story of Daniel is actually not just about Daniel. The story of Daniel is also about three other guys, three other young men, including Daniel. Let's check them out in verse 6. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were four of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. And so how would Daniel and his three buddies stand out and stand strong in their faith in a culture of compromise? I mean, how are they going to do it? They're 1,000 miles from their homeland. They're 1,000 miles from their family. How are they going to stand out and stand strong in their faith? How will they do it? Well, here's the first thing that they chose to do. Number one, you remember. This is how we do it. You remember who God says you are. You remember who God says you are. That's what you do. Check out verse 7. I think this is really, really relevant for us today. The chief of staff renamed them. This is important now. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. Azariah was called Abednego. Now, I don't want us to gloss over these names because, like I said, they're very, very important. You see, not only does the king want to change the way they think, the way they behave, what they believe, but he wants to change their sense of identity. He wants to change who they think they are. Now, let's look and see how subtle this really is. Daniel, the name Daniel, it actually means God is my judge. His name, though, was changed to Belshazzar. Belshazzar, that name actually means Lady Protect the King. Lady Protect the King. Now let that sink in for just a moment. The first thing they do is to give Daniel a girl's name. Now, I can kind of relate to Daniel in this respect. My name is Lynn, right? I can't tell you how many times I've gotten mail addressed to Miss Lynn Coleman or to Mrs. Lynn Coleman. In fact, one time I got a piece of mail addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Coleman. I opened it up. It says, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, we have a wonderful new life insurance policy for your daughter Lynn." I'm going like, wait a minute. What in the world is this anyway? Now, Sandy and I will go out to dinner, and this happens quite often. We'll go out to dinner, and we'll finish our dinner. The waiter or the waitress brings us our check. I take the check. I pull out of my wallet my debit card or maybe my credit card. I give them the check and the debit card. I give it to them. They take it. They run it. They come back, and guess who they give the debit card back to? My wife, Sandy. I'm the one who gave it to him, so I can kind of relate, can't I? I can kind of relate to Daniel. Now, don't miss what the Babylonians are doing here. You see, the thing of it is, if you study pagan culture, if you study pagan cultures, there's always gender confusion. You see, culture begins to say, I'm not sure if you're a guy. Culture begins to say, I'm not sure if you're a lady. You see, if your culture tells you that enough, if the culture tells you, I'm not sure if you're a man or a woman, if they tell you that enough, then you begin to question it yourself. Or you begin to believe what they tell you yourself. And one of Satan's strategies, I really believe, is to try to confuse our culture when it comes to gender. And I think we're there today. We can see it with Daniel back in 605 BC. Now, let's go on. Hananiah's name. Hananiah's name actually means God has been gracious. But they changed Hananiah's name to the name Shadrach. The name Shadrach means, I am fearful of God. I am fearful of God. Mishael means, it means who God, or who is what God is. I mean, who is what God is? That's basically saying there is no one like God. But they changed his name to Meshach. The name Meshach means I am despised and shameful before God. Azariah means God has helped. But his new name, Abednego, actually means servant of Nebo. Servant of Nebo. Now, you may wonder, well, who in the world is this Nebo guy? This Nebo guy is actually a little g god, a little g, a false god. Now understand this. Understand this. These Hebrew young men, these teenagers, they were given their names by their parents. They weren't just given their names by their parents, but their names were given to them by their parents, and their names were all related back to God. They're all related back to the one true God. They had a sense of God's identity in them, but now their new names are totally tied to these false gods. Listen, this is why when a culture shifts, you've got to remember who God says you are. You have got to remember who God says you are. Our culture today will say, you know what, you can't amount to anything. Our culture will say today, you're fat. You're way too skinny. Our culture says today, you know what, you're stupid, you're weird. Do not let culture define you. Only let God define you. Because God says this. God says you are important. God says you are mine. God says you are beautiful. God says you are made in my image. God says you are my son and you are my daughter. You're made in my image. You see, the point is so very important. Never, ever forget who God says you are. You're a child of the King. Now, here's a second thing if you want to stand out and if you want to stand strong. Here it is, resolve. Resolve not to compromise ahead of time. Resolve that you will not compromise ahead of time. I mean, not only did the king want to change the way they thought, what they believed, how they lived, their identity, but he also wanted to change what they ate. He wanted them to eat the meats and the drinks from his table. The meats and the drinks from his table were all dedicated to pagan gods. And Daniel and his buddies were going, I'm not so sure about that. Check out verse 8. But Daniel, and here's the word, Daniel resolved. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. I mean, don't you love it? Stop and think about this. Before the temptation was actually in front of him, Daniel predetermined what he would do and what he would not do. Hear me loud and clear. Your spiritual success in so many ways is going to be determined by what you decide in advance. Your spiritual success in so many ways is going to be determined by what you decide in advance. Think about that. What you decide in advance to do and what you decide in advance not to do. You predetermine that you will not get loaded or wasted on the weekend. You predetermine that in your mind and in your heart. You predetermine that you will not have any intimate conversation whatsoever with anyone other than your own spouse. You make that decision before you're actually in that situation. You predetermine that no matter how bad the economy gets, no matter how high the gas prices get, you predetermine that, you know what, I am going to tithe to the Lord. You see, you predetermine. You decide ahead of time, just like Daniel did. And then Daniel, in his situation, he asked permission. He asked for permission from the chief of staff to eat another diet. But the chief of staff, he said, nah, I'm not so sure about that. What if you guys start looking really, really bad? Well, you've heard of hands-on management styles, right? You've heard of hands-off management styles, right? How about this? King Nebuchadnezzar had a heads-off management style. Stop and think about that. If you did not do what he thought you ought to do, off with your head. And when he terminated somebody in his cabinet, guess what? He terminated somebody in his cabinet, right? They were gone. They were out of there. Now Daniel made this proposal in chapter 1, verse 12. He says, please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. A diet of vegetables and water. Daniel said that. In verse 13, it goes on to say, at the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. In other words, hey, listen, we're going to eat veggies and waters for 10 days. Those guys can have all the saturated fats they want to have for the king's table. We don't care. But we're going to eat this, they're going to eat that. At the end of 10 days, check us out. Make sure that we're not any better or any worse than those other guys. And that's what happened. Look at verse 15. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. And so they got to keep their diet. How do you stand strong? How do you stand strong in a shifting culture? You remember who you are, who God says you are. That's how you stand strong. Not only that, but you resolve ahead of time not to compromise. Not to compromise. And then number 3 this morning, you rely on one another. You rely on one another. Understand this. Christianity was never ever meant to be a solo sport. Following the Lord, following Jesus Christ was never ever meant to be a solo sport. Standing strong means that you stand strong with one another. Check out Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 18. And by the way, I've underlined them for you. However, what I want you to do is this. Count the number of times that you see the words them or they in this text. Okay? Count the number of times you see the words them or they in the text. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so they entered the king's service. It goes on to say, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Did you count the number of times that the words them or they were used? Anybody want to shout it out? 6, exactly right. He used the words they or them 6 different times in 3 different verses. 6 different times. Do you know what that points out to me? That points this out to me. That points out the fact that these guys stood strong, but they stood strong together. And if we're going to stand strong in a shifting culture that we're in, if we're going to stand strong, we need each other. That's why small groups are so very important. That's why if you're a part of a Sunday school class, it's so very important. In fact, did you know this? We started a brand new Sunday school class today. Down the education wing, go out this lobby, down the education wing, we started a brand new Sunday school class. If you would like to be a part of that Sunday school class, we would love to have you be a part of that Sunday school class. All you have to do is talk to me or Pastor Jay. Jay, raise your hand. There we go. Talk to him. He'll get you involved. And also, later this month, I think we're going to be starting a brand new small group if we've not started it already. If you want to be a part of a small group of people centered around Jesus Christ, talk to myself or, again, talk to Pastor Jay. Get involved. Stand with one another. Now, there's a lot of people who say, I don't want to be involved in a small group, or I don't want to be a part of a Sunday school class for any number of reasons. And I think one of the reasons that people say they don't want to be involved is because they think to themselves, you know what, I don't want to go into a house or go into a room where people have it all together. And then they get to know me, and they find out that, man, his relationships are really all messed up. Or, man, I didn't realize it, but that dude's got quite a few addictions going on in his life. Or they might say, you know what, I don't want to be involved in a group of any kind because my finances are absolutely horrible, and they've got it all together. Get this. If you're involved with a group of Christians, that's the best place that you can be. If you have finance problems, if you have addiction problems, if you have relationship problems, if you have any kind of a problem, being involved with another group of Christians is the best place you can be. They can help you. They can encourage you. They can walk you through the minefield of whatever it is you're going through. It's the best place you can be. And get this, you may not realize it, But every single person in this room, just like every single person on the planet, we all fight our battles, myself included. Every Sunday I get up here and I talk like I have it all together. Don't talk to my wife. Anyway, I don't have it all together, right? I don't have it all together. And neither do you. It's a great place to be amongst other Christian people where they can help you through those tough times, whatever they may be. And so get involved with a small group. Get involved with a Sunday school class so that you can be a better Christian for God. Please do that. Now look at number 4. Standing strong in a shifting culture, you need to expect to be torn down when you courageously stand out. Expect to be actually torn down. Now, by the time we get to Daniel chapter 6, it's about 67 years or so from when Daniel has been taken captive into Babylon. Daniel, at this point, is most likely in his 80s. At this point, Nebuchadnezzar is no longer king. Now we have a brand new king on the scene. This king's name is Darius. King Darius. And King Darius actually loved Daniel. Let's pick it up, Daniel chapter 6, and let's look at verse 3. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Daniel was the go-to guy. And because he was the go-to guy, you could always count on Daniel. You could always count on Daniel. You see, Darius was so impressed with Daniel that he wanted to take him from being in charge of 1/3 of the empire to being in charge of the entire empire. The whole ball of wax. You're in charge of everything, Daniel. Now, some of you know what I'm talking about here. When you stand out, you can expect other people to tear you down. Let's say you get a promotion. Some of your so-called friends, shall we say, they hear about it, they're jealous of you, and guess what they do? They're critical of you. Or they may even kind of, unfriend you in one way or another. Or maybe you've become a lot more passionate about following Jesus Christ. Some of your lukewarm Christian friends, because you're more passionate about following Jesus Christ, now they're going to start being critical of you even more. And you're going like, what's going on here? I'm just trying to get closer to the Lord. Or maybe you think that God has called you to get out of debt. Or maybe you think that God's called you to start downsizing. Maybe you think that God has called you to do this or to do that or to do the other thing. You see, as a result of you changing your life for the better, people will tear you down. And that's what happened to Daniel. I mean, his colleagues are absolutely ticked off. They start looking for ways to take him out before he takes charge of the entire empire. They look at his Twitter accounts. They look at his YouTube channel. They look at this. They look at all of social media. They try to figure out what's going on with Daniel. But guess what? When they look at everything in Daniel's life, they find out that Daniel is actually squeaky clean. The text goes on to say this in verse 4. Then the and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was heading or handling the government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. Look at this last sentence, would you please? He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Look at that last sentence again. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Can your friends, can your work associates, can your family members say that about you? He, she was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Can they say that about you? I mean, wouldn't you love it if everyone you came into contact with, everybody you rubbed shoulders with, were to be able to say that about you? Wouldn't you just love that? I mean, that would be wonderful, right? Because they couldn't find anything wrong with Daniel because he was completely trustworthy. Then guess what they did? They then went to King Darius. They go to King Darius, and they start buttering the guy up. Oh, King Darius, you are so awesome. I mean, King Darius, are you going to the gym here lately? I mean, your biceps are just bulging through your robe. I mean, you look awesome, man. You must be lifting weights. And King Darius, I mean, you are so good looking. You are so handsome. You are this and you are that. And guess what? He started buying what they were selling. He started believing everything that they were saying. And then they went on to say, hey, King Darius, what you ought to be doing is this. You ought to make it a law in our empire that if anybody worships any other god other than you, King Darius, if anybody worships any other god other than you, they will be thrown into the lion's den. And like I said, he was buying everything they were selling. He said, yeah, you're right. I am pretty awesome. I am good looking. I do have those kind of muscles. I am going to make that law. And he did. Daniel's enemies think to themselves, at this point, we've got Daniel. Now, why do they think we've got Daniel? They think we've got Daniel because Daniel prays 3 times a day. We're at his house by an open window, and they know it. And so what does Daniel do at this point? Daniel, at this point, what does he do? Does he skip town? Does he run? Does he hide? Does he jump a plane for Mexico? No, he doesn't do that. Check out, well, that brings me to number 5. Number 5 is this. Never ever forget, kneeling to pray is what gives you strength to stand. I mean, this is your secret weapon. Kneeling to pray is what gives you the strength to stand in a shifting culture. Check out verse 10. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. So much of Daniel's life was based on his pre-decisions. So much of Daniel's life was based on what he decided to do months and even years before. He didn't decide this at the moment. He decided it a long time ago. He determined a long, long time ago that he needed to talk to God not once, not twice, but 3 times a day. I need to talk to God first thing in the morning when I get up. I need to talk to God right in the middle of the day sometime. And before I go to bed at night, man, I really need to talk to God again. And you know what? That's a great pattern for us to follow as well, isn't it? Talk to God first thing in the morning. Talk to God midday. Talk to God at the end of the day. And when Daniel's enemies see him praying by these open windows, they're thinking, busted, we got you. You're going to be toast. They then run back to the king with the news. Hey, King Darius, guess what? This guy is praying to another god. He's not praying to you. And the king is utterly devastated. Remember what I said about King Darius and Daniel? He just loved Daniel. But the king is devastated because he knows that Daniel will have to go into the lion's den. It's a law of the Medes and Persians, and he has to do it. And he's thrown into the lion's den. And when he's thrown into the lion's den, he's not thrown into the lion's den where there's a bunch of little, a bunch of little furry felines. No, he's thrown into the lion's den where there are these hungry lions. They're going to tear him from limb to limb. Now, we don't know what happened to the lion's den, but we do know what didn't happen in the lion's den. Oh, he could have been praying in the corner somewhere. Praying in the corner, curled up like in the fetal position, peeing his pants. He could have been doing that. Or he could have been in the lion's den, right there in the middle of the lion's den, saying, here, kitty, 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 here, kitty, 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 and petting the lions. He could have been doing that too. We just don't know. But we do know by the power of God, Daniel did not die in the lion's den. The night rolls by. First thing in the morning, King Darius gets up. He goes, he rushes to the lion's den, only to find Daniel alive and well. And the king is utterly elated. In fact, he's so elated that guess what? Not only did he give him, control of the entire empire, he made him the prime minister of the entire empire. And then he went on to decree that everyone in the empire, every single person in the empire would worship Daniel's God. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? Now, this is what you need to know from today. You need to know this. God has placed you exactly where you are to make an impact. God has placed you exactly where you are to make an impact. Students, it might be in the classroom. God's placed you in the classroom that you're in to make an impact for Him. Dad, Mom, it may be where you work. It may be the shift on which you work. Maybe it's your vendors. Maybe your customers. Your friends, your neighbors, your family. I don't know. Co-workers. And do you remember what I said a little while ago? How in the world can I make an impact? And do you remember what I said about your secret weapon? Your secret weapon is prayer. Your secret weapon is praying. Why don't you start today praying by name for your friends? For those people you work with. The people at your school. The people on your shift. And I really wonder, if you actually start praying for those people by name, I actually wonder if they just might accept an invitation to our Easter services in April. Will they accept an invitation from you? Or even further than that. Maybe in time, because you're praying for them nonstop every day, maybe in time they'll not only accept an invitation, but maybe in time they'll accept Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior because you have prayed nonstop for them. You see, prayer is your secret weapon. Guys, I am no one special. I'm really not. You see, you and me, we're all dark horses. We're all ordinary, everyday kind of people who can have a major impact on the world around us. We really can. And prayer is our secret weapon. Let's all be a dark horse for Jesus Christ. Let's bow our heads and pray, shall we? Our Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this day. And God, we're thankful that we can come here today, learn from this guy whose name is Daniel. Daniel was just an ordinary, everyday kind of teenager. Probably had all the hang-ups, probably had all the deals going on in his life that we did when we were young or we do right now. And God, I pray that as we give our lives to you more and more every day, that God, you would make a major impact through us on our friends, the people that we work with, the people we live next door to, across the street from. So God, help us all to make a major impact on those around us. God, we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.